But just to be really clear on this, I mean, the Quran has material in it which reflects pretty closely literature that was circulating in the late antique Near East. So some examples I think that you mentioned are, for example, the story of Alexander, who in the Quran is Dhul Qarnayn, although some people would deny that, or the story of the sleepers of Ephesus, both of those accounts in Quran 18, but material on Jesus and other biblical prophets as well, some of which is found in the canonical Bible, other elements of which are not. So, I mean, you're saying that this sort of engagement with literary traditions would more likely take place in a literate culture, but someone might push back and say, well, I mean, you just need a storyteller. You just need, I don't know, like old Orientalists would say, or like Tor Andre, the Swedish scholar, speculates that, Muhammad was in a fair and there were probably traveling missionaries there who just showed up and started telling stories. I'm kind of paraphrasing and not doing justice to a good scholar. But I mean, what if someone said, they're just storytellers. You don't actually need a literate culture to receive and then comment on, reproduce this material.
Yeah, I mean, that's the sort of the old Deus ex machina of oral tradition that has routinely been invoked, and I just don't think it is sufficient in this case. The Quran seems to show a level of sophistication and in some instances precision that is beyond what we generally would find from oral tradition. So, I mean, but in any case, even if there are these storytellers, where are they getting their stories? Right? I don't see any evidence of a Christian community, anyone there. There's no evidence of a Jewish community in Mecca, right? What do you do with all the Jewish lore that's in the so-called Meccan surahs? Though I know you, like me, don't particularly place a lot of stock in that strict chronology, or at least that's the way it was the last time we talked. Who knows? I mean, our opinions change on this. That's the other thing. If I get new evidence, I'll change my mind on a lot of these opinions. I'm more than willing to do so, especially on this question about the state of culture. But with no Christians down there, and you bring up the Bible, there's all this biblical tradition in there. Was the Bible in Arabic already at this time?
Well, I don't think so.
Right. Right. So where are they getting this? They don't have they're not literate. There's no Bible even in Arabic. How are they getting all of this big dose of biblical, extra biblical Jewish Christian culture? Some of it, yeah. I mean, I still allow that some of the Quran may go back to Muhammad, may come from there, but I don't think we can explain all of the Quran that way. I don't think we can explain the Alexander traditions as just someone heard a story and told it. Some of our friends have argued pretty convincingly, I think, that this clearly shows it's copying a literary source. And you want to talk about the Kathisma. Should we do it now?
Yes, we should. I just want to bring up one point related to Alexander. But right, all of like the vibe and our momentum is sort of bringing this conversation to Palestine, Syria. So we've got to speak about the Kathisma. But just to mention about Alexander, so as I said a little bit ago, Quran 18 has this character, Dhul Qarnayn, and scholars like Kevin Van Bledo and Tommaso Tazzei and others have argued that there is a direct literary connection to one particular Syriac work known as the Neshana. And they would back you up on your last point that this sort of correspondence we're seeing here reflects a direct connection of these two texts. Not that the Quran is copying the text. Quran is in Arabic. These texts are in Syriac, but something that is precise enough to connect these two texts in not vague tradition. So let me just leave it at that. Kathisma. Now, I'm so glad that you brought this up, because what we're sort of getting at is this idea that there's a biblical, especially Christian thing going on in the Quran's context. You're arguing that Mecca and Medina don't have signs of Christianity. I'm a little more skeptical on that, but that's okay. Let's set that aside for now. So that could suggest that some of the material in the Quran originates not in Arabia, but further north. And you were the scholar who brought to the world's attention one possible case of this, which is the fact that the Quranic story of Jesus's birth in Surah 19, Surah Maryam, involves the miracle of the palm tree. So where the baby Jesus speaks miraculously and calls down a palm tree to lower itself and give fruit to his mother. And I mean, I should let you take it from here. So what's the connection between that story and this one church in Jerusalem, Bethlehem, called the Kathisma?
Right. And it also gives some serious credit to my very good friend, colleague, and frequent collaborator, Guillaume D, who's also worked on these traditions and has developed them. I think developed my initial insight into an even stronger argument for connecting the Quranic passage with this particular holy site in Jerusalem. I mean, actually, this was a point that connected some of my early work on early Christian devotion to Mary. And another thing I work on is liturgy in Jerusalem. That's what I'm actually working on currently at the moment, is hymnography from late 6th century Jerusalem, which we actually have, believe it or not. It's amazing. But this Kathisma church, it was probably, I'm going to be careful here because I could really go into a deep dive here. We're already getting short in the hour. Let's just say exactly as Gabriel said. There is this peculiar configuration of certain Christian traditions about the nativity of Jesus that are always separate, that really have very little to do with each other, but through a very peculiar happenstance of the history of this shrine, of the history of the Jerusalem liturgy, they are brought together at this church along the side of the road in a remote location halfway between Jerusalem and Bethlehem. Which was probably, I think, the original nativity shrine in the Jerusalem area, but that's another rabbit hole. Partly these traditions became attached to it because the nativity was moved to Bethlehem. They had to find a new significance for this nativity shrine. And lo and behold, this configuration of extra biblical traditions about the birth of Jesus looks almost exactly like what we find in the Quranic nativity account. Right? It's these same peculiar traditions that have come together. Now, before identifying this shrine, we would have said maybe, well, maybe just whoever was writing this passage of the Quran happened to know this tradition and throw it together. But now we can say, actually, we can look at a site connected with the nativity of Jesus in Jerusalem that has this exact configuration of traditions. One of the things Guillaume discovered was the readings that go with this shrine, the liturgical readings, map perfectly onto this part of the Quranic story where, if I'm remembering correctly, that Abraham is Mary's brother, or vice versa. She's the sister of Abraham. Remembering this correctly?
Of Aaron.
Aaron, sorry, thank you. That's what I knew something was wrong with me. Actually, the readings for this shrine perfectly explain that passage. Right? If this whole complex is coming from there, something like we find in the Quran looks like exactly what's going on at that shrine. We also know that the archaeologists have determined this shrine was the model architecturally for the Dome of the Rock. So it obviously was something pretty important for Muhammad's early Islam.
That's a really important point. Yeah, people should.
But it also was converted into a mosque by the early 6th century, and it's probably the earliest sacred shrine, Christian shrine, appropriated by the Muslims in Islamic Jerusalem, at least that I know of. So yeah, all of this just really comes together. And I'll finish with this. If we were dealing with a problem, say, relevant to the history of the New Testament, to a gospel, to something in Acts, and we found something in Greco-Roman past, something about a pagan shrine, everything came together and just mapped onto something from one of the stories about Paul in Acts, there would be no question. Everyone would say, obviously, that's coming from that cultural configuration there in the world that these documents were being written in. And then here's another extension of this, back to what we were talking about previously. I don't think this is something that a storyteller just walks down to Mecca and tells. This is a very specific tradition unique to this shrine. We don't find knowledge of this configuration anywhere else in the early Christian tradition. Nowhere else do these traditions come together. Nowhere else do they come together with a writing, with readings that can explain Mary as Aaron's sister. Nowhere do they come together in a building that was the architectural model for the Dome of the Rock that became the first Christian space appropriated by Muslims. I mean, are you getting sort of the stacking of like, you
Right,
know, if
right.
it were one of these things, two of these things, but five of these things, for me, it kind of starts to create a high probability that there's a connection here. And I don't think it's a connection that could have been made in Mecca.
So the passage that I referred to earlier that is connected here is when the infant Jesus, according to most readings, although there's an interesting dispute among exegetes or commentators here, this is Qur'an 19, Surat Maryam, verse 24. Thereupon he called her from below her, do not grieve. Your Lord has made a spring to flow at your feet. Shake the trunk of the palm tree. Freshly picked dates will drop upon you. And this is related to, this miracle is known from Christian texts. I think the Gospel of Pseudo Matthew, I think.
It's known in Pseudo Matthew, but it's actually known earlier in a book called The Book of Mary's Repose,
Okay.
which is one of the earliest, very lengthy account of the end of Mary's life. And it's a text we know is circulating in Palestine because we have Christian Palestinian Aramaic fragments of it, the date of the 6th century, monastery of Marsaba. All Christian Palestinian Aramaic comes from Greek, so we know this story was circulating in Palestine in the 5th and the 6th century.
Now, one last
Jerusalem.
question about the Kathisma, and then we can move on to maybe a final topic, and then I'll leave you in peace. I have seen images of a mosaic of a palm tree from the Kathisma Church,
Yes.
which I think is no longer in situ, but has either been covered to protect it or it's been removed. I'm not sure. But I can't remember who sent it to me, but it's possible it was Guillaume, but I'm not sure. But the idea was that the presence of the palm tree there might reflect the associating of the spot with this very tradition of the Kathisma and the Quran. Do you know about this palm tree? Just thought I'd ask.
Of course, I know all about this palm tree.
Okay.
I've visited the site many times. I was just there most recently last March. And I do think it's still in situ, but it's covered and you can't see it. I went with the excavator Rena Abner when I was living in East Jerusalem in 1999-2000, and she gave me a personal tour of the site as it was just being excavated. And she showed me the mosaic at that time, so I've seen it. There are lots of pictures of it available that you can find. Yes, that is the thinking, that this connects it to the mosque. This is what I think when I was first writing on this back in 2001, 2002, in my book on the ancient Dormition traditions, the archaeologists thought that the mosaic was Byzantine, but we now know it's part of the conversion to a mosque.
Okay.
So it's an Islamic mosaic of a palm tree at this ancient nativity shrine. So we just added layer 7 on top, I think, right? I mean,